fluoridation project. So, and Trevor's got hit record, so we're all good to go.
Okay, let me go ahead and share my slides here. And thanks again, guys, for being willing to listen to me for a longer amount of time. I, had to laugh when Matt asked about talking about this, because I said, I don't think you really want to hear all about Pennsylvania, even though we love Pennsylvania and we would talk about it for hours and hours and hours. So I did try to build some of this information up for, something that would be more relevant in really any state. So hopefully you'll see that. And we're going to talk just a little bit about community water fluoridation in general, and how important it is in rural areas. And we are going to share a little bit of information about a project that our coalition has worked on, that we're hoping can be replicated in other states. Just kind of want to give that shout out. Let me move my little toolbar over here. And I'm curious if you guys have a minute while we're getting started on slides, if anybody has kind of wants to share in the chat box if you know a little bit about community water fluoridation, a lot about community water fluoridation. If you love it, if you hate it, I would love to just sort of gauge what the public perception in the room is of community water fluoridation, because that's always a very important question to ask when we're talking about this. So feel free to just kind of type into the chat and let me know what, if you had to come up with a couple words to describe what you know or how you feel about community water fluoridation, what you would say. So again, thanks again, everybody, for staying on to hear me talk a little bit about community water fluoridation. We're going to talk mostly about, what community water fluoridation is, why it is important, in particular for rural areas, and then, how you can support community water fluoridation. And that project that I mentioned is something that we're doing to support community water fluoridation. So we're going to come around to that by the end of the discussion. So let's see here. So, and thank you for the compliment there in the chat. I love it. I'll get totally distracted and my cheeks will turn red and I won't be able to function, but we'll try. Okay, so what is community water fluoridation really? Because a lot of people use that term, and maybe not everybody completely understands it. When I started working for the coalition 4 years ago, I really didn't know very much, even though I had been a dental hygienist and practiced clinically for many, many years. I didn't understand the science behind it, and I didn't really understand how it worked in a community. So some great topics in getting put in the chat there, so thank you so much. So when we're actually talking about the definition of community water fluoridation, it's the process of adjusting the amount of naturally occurring fluoride in drinking water to a level that's recommended for preventing tooth decay, right? So that's pretty easy, pretty basic. The key word there and why it's underlined is the word adjusting, and we're going to talk a little bit about that because, as many of you probably do know, fluoride is a naturally occurring mineral. So it's something that is found automatically in the Earth's crust. It's found in our water sources just naturally. And what we have discovered when we're looking at fluoride and fluoridation is the optimal amount that we would like in water for healthy teeth is 0.7 parts per million. So that's very, very small. So what is fluoride? Fluoride is, a mineral that, as I mentioned, occurs naturally on Earth. It's actually released from rocks into the soil and the water and the air. So that's why we see it in all forms of water. Fluoride levels in water generally are not enough to prevent tooth decay. So that's why we aim for that 0.7 parts per million. So I love these stats because I think it's really important to understand just these are naturally occurring fluoride levels. So when we look at surface water, which is where oftentimes our water supplies come from, we see it in lower concentrations. So that 0.2 parts per million, not going to be enough to help your teeth. Okay. When we see deeper water, we see a little bit more in terms of concentration, and there's a pretty wide variance there. Again, let's keep in mind that 0.7 parts per million. So we're talking about, some areas that may have sufficient amounts in groundwater, and some areas that might have too much in groundwater. And always very interesting, the ocean is typically 0.8 to 1.4, which is actually pretty good for teeth. So if we could drink ocean water, it would be really great for our dentition, but we can't drink ocean water. So just some little fast stats there on the element fluoride. So how did we discover that fluoride is good for teeth, right? Because, you know, that's kind of makes you wonder where that would have come from in the first place. There was a dentist that practiced back in the early 1900s. And, you know, this is actually a picture of him, so he's showing off that water there. And he was practicing in Colorado and discovered that all of these kind of different groups from these communities had this really strange brown stain on their teeth and couldn't figure it out. And was trying to figure out why the stain was on the teeth. And what they kind of quickly realized was that everyone who had the brown stain didn't have very many cavities. So it's kind of like this observation of, you know, if one, then the other. And so he started to sort of explore that and to do some research back in the early 1900s and to figure out who had it and who didn't have it. So discovered that it was the fluoride in the water and that that area of Colorado had a much higher concentration than actually what we would want, but then that the individuals that lived in those areas had really strong teeth. So after a lot of research, they did about 20 to 30 years of research on fluoride before, adjusting the amount in the water. But in 1945, the city of Grand Rapids, Michigan was the first to actually add fluoride to the city water system. And it was with the intention of giving those residents the benefits of fluoride. So when we're talking about adjusting that level of fluoride, that's community water fluoridation. So since then, of course, we've seen hundreds and hundreds of cities that have started to do this. When we talk about looking at the United States as a whole, we're right around 70% of people who get their water from a water system have adjusted fluoride in the water. And as I mentioned in the chat there, after, you know, of course, we've known this has been successful for the past 75 years, and the CDC has named community water fluoridation as one of the 10 great public health achievements of the 20th century. So we know it's good for us. We know it's safe because it's been well tested. I swear, I think fluoride and water fluoridation is probably the most heavily researched topic that has ever been researched. And after 75 years, we've actually never found any detriment at the levels that are recommended for water fluoridation. So I do say that with the caveat that, you know, you can find studies that say if you have 100 times the amount of fluoride you're supposed to have, that it's not good for you. But of course, if you have 100 times the water you're supposed to have, it's not good for you. So definitely at the level that we use for water fluoridation, which is that 0.7 parts per million, completely safe, and there's never been one study to prove that it wasn't. So really important stuff. So why is it actually important? Yes, you know, we want fluoride in our water, and yes, it's a great public health measure, but how has it actually proven to protect teeth from decay? So as I mentioned, we've had, you know, 75 years of evidence, research, and every major health organization across the world says, yes, optimally fluoridated water protects your teeth and does not pose any risks to your health. So we want to make sure that we're adding just the right amount, and we want to know how it's working. What's been interesting is we've seen a decline in tooth decay and the number of people who've lost all of their teeth. Some of that, of course, is attributed to better home care and things like fluoride toothpaste. But you know, the World Health Organization has said that it's very much probably attributed more to water fluoridation than anything else. And how it works is it actually reduces tooth decay by 25% over a lifetime. So that's for adults, for kids, and they've even done studies where they've compared people who are already using fluoride products like fluoride toothpaste and compared non-fluoridated water to fluoridated water and found out that you still see that reduction. We still see that 25% reduction over the lifetime in tooth decay. And as I mentioned, that 70%, 211 million U.S. residents have access to fluoridated water. Now, how fluoride works. So first, to understand how fluoride works, you kind of have to understand how that dental disease works. So, we look at bacteria that exist in the mouth, and they live there all the time. So if you didn't know this, there can be up to 700 different species of bacteria that live in your mouth. And so that's kind of gross. And most of them are not bad for you, but some of them are. And some of those bad ones actually produce acid when you eat sugary foods, and they consume those sugary foods as well. And then that acid is what eats away the strength of your teeth and that enamel. And just as an FYI, the enamel in your teeth is stronger than the bones in your body. So it has to be pretty strong acid to actually eat it away. So something to keep in mind. So fluoride is a really amazing element because it's going to rebuild that enamel. It's going to make it stronger just by simply washing over the tooth or being incorporated into the tooth. So how water fluoridation works is it's actually preventing that tooth decay by giving you a frequent and consistent contact of low levels of fluoride. So it's just this constant thing. Now, we talk about topical effects and we talk about systemic effects of fluoride. Now, water fluoridation actually works in both of these manners. So topical, we think, oh, the fluoride treatment they give you at the dentist. I don't know if you guys remember, if even as adults, you get the fluoride treatments with the trays and the goo and the foam, and not so great. We've definitely come a long way in that. But then we also know we're supposed to be using fluoridated toothpaste. So we get all of that. That adds the fluoride. That gives you that topical washing over effect that's actively helping strengthen the teeth from the outside in. When we talk about systemic, we're saying also from the inside. So especially for young children, when their teeth are developing, you actually are able to have that fluoride that actually kind of joins in with the enamel crystals and helps strengthen the teeth from the inside out. Now, what's amazing about community water fluoridation is it works both ways. So, we're talking of the topical effect of just washing over the outside of the teeth, but we're also talking about a systemic effect that is absorbed into the saliva, into your spit, and then all day long when you're salivating and your mouth is being bathed in that saliva, it's getting some of that more internal fluoride application as well. So really, really important stuff there. So why is dental disease a problem? And if maybe you've had kids or you've known kids that have had, dental disease, and somebody has said, they're just baby teeth, so what if you get a cavity or two? It's not really a big deal. And the idea is that it's an infection. It's an infection in your mouth. And, it can cause a lot of other chronic illnesses and kind of exacerbate what happens to your whole body. So what we do know is that tooth decay is the most common chronic disease for kids. That means it's 5 times more common than asthma. We see it even more often than obesity and diabetes. And so it's a disease that we can, we try to eradicate, and we're trying to we know that it causes problems. But what a lot of people don't understand is that it's not a disease that you kind of have to get. It's not something that you're born with. Those bacteria that cause all the problems are not bacteria that you're born with. We get it because somebody infects us with it. And typically that happens in childhood. So you're born with this mouth that's relatively void of all these bacteria, and, mom takes your pacifier and puts it in your mouth, and then she just inoculated you with all of those yummy bacteria. Or, we're doing baby food and we warm it up, and then of course we have to test it because we don't want to burn the baby's face. So we take a little bite or a snack of that spoon and we taste test that, creamed bananas or whatever, and we're basically then passing that bacteria onto our kids. So for kids, their mouth and the microbiome of their mouth, all those bacteria get established usually by age 5. So if we can prevent those bacteria from setting up shop before age 5, typically you're not going to have a lot of trouble with dental disease. So what water fluoridation is able to do is to help rebuild that enamel, help fight those bacteria, and give you stronger teeth to fight
those bacteria that you're probably going to get exposed to at some point. When we worry about that, so, okay, you get a cavity, you get a filling, no big deal, right? We've all done that. But what we don't see is that, as Kelly and I just talked about, in terms of access and workforce and people struggling to find dental care, is that this disease is, a disease that progresses. So if it starts as a small cavity, yes, it's no big deal to have a filling done. But if it gets it to the inside of the tooth, it gets to the nerve of the tooth, it causes major infections. And all of your nerve supplies and everything that are in your teeth obviously are in your head, which get really close to your brain and all of the different systems of your body. So we see toothaches develop pretty quickly, and we know that those infections can spread to all parts of your body. Also, when that happens, sometimes you lose teeth. We obviously then have difficulties with chewing and speech. If you can't chew, you're not going to gain weight effectively. If your mouth is in pain and you're a young child, you're not going to be able to learn in the classroom. So for anyone who's had a toothache before, you know how severe that pain can be. And imagine trying to sit in a classroom for 6 or 7 hours and learn while you actively have that pain and that pressure right in your face. So all of those things really do kind of add up to why dental disease is such a problem. Of course, it's expensive to treat. And then in rare instances, that infection can cause death. So, there have been numerous people, children and adults alike, who have lost their lives from what basically started as a simple cavity. And so we want to try to prevent that disease as much as possible. So when we talk about dental disease and what's the fair share, we know that kids from low-income families are more than twice as likely to have dental problems. So it isn't something that affects everyone at the same rate. So it's a health equity issue. We see that there's a higher percentage of cavities in the kids that would be considered low income. And what ends up happening oftentimes with these kids is they end up in operating rooms and under anesthesia because it's very difficult to treat them while they're awake. And so just the statistic here from Colorado that showed, our average cost for those hospital cases, $10,000 to $15,000 per child. So the reason I'm sharing that is that's pretty costly. And we have a really easy way to prevent like 25% of those cases. So, the study in Israel referenced here is talking about, that water fluoridation could save actually 300 hospitalizations each year. Again, at that cost, it's a significant amount of money. With those kids, it doesn't actually cost a ton of money to fluoridate. And I do want to mention that some of the data points referenced here are all from the resources that I'm going to share at the end. So definitely you'll be able to have the facts from those. So how do you support community water fluoridation if you're a health advocate in your community? First, let's talk a little bit about rural versus urban when we talk wells. So water fluoridation is a great thing and we love it, but if you get your water source from a private well, then you don't have the benefit of getting a community water system that fluoridates. So rural communities rely pretty heavily on private wells for water sources. And I put some facts here, which I think pretty interesting. We know that 40 million people are relying on private wells in the United States. And when we look at the number of Americans living in rural areas, we know that that number is around 60 million. And you guys can probably correct me if I have that statistic wrong. Now, those two populations, so we're talking rural communities and those served by wells, aren't 100% overlapped. So it's not, it's not an if one then the other. But we do know there's a significant portion of those in rural areas who are also served by private wells. And when we look at, the map of the United States and we say, okay, where are they? Who has the highest number of well users? Interestingly enough, it's, Michigan, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania, which, for whatever rhyme or reason, those three states all have more than 2 million well users in their states. Now, when we look at a percentage of total population, it's very much Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. So just that little tiny northeastern tip of the United States, they're actually the 3 states that all have over 30% of their residents being served by wells. So when you're thinking about ways to get healthy teeth and healthy behaviors in those areas, sometimes community water fluoridation may not be the best choice because a significant number of your population is not going to be served by those community water systems. So when we're talking about folks that are served by wells, we need to do a little bit more individual investigation. So some states like Pennsylvania only have a small amount of fluoride that naturally occurs in the water. We really don't have any water sources for private wells that would provide over 0.3 parts per million. So only about half of what we need for dental benefits. Other states like Colorado, as I mentioned with the brown stain, they've had naturally occurring amounts, identified up to over 10 parts per million. So not 0.7, 10 parts per million, which will cause detriments to people's health. It's too much of a good thing. Now, the EPA sets a maximum level across the states of 4.0 parts per million is their maximum level. Most states have a lower level that they set at the state threshold. So for Pennsylvania, it's 2.0. We know that at amounts under 2.0, we're not going to have any type of systemic health problems. So when we are looking and helping our communities, and we're going to talk a little bit about this whole well process and water systems, and how do we then advocate for systems that do use community water systems to adjust that fluoride, that's really the first thing we want to talk about. We want to use the word adjust. Because when you say the word add fluoride, so I'm adding fluoride to my water, you're actually not speaking the truth there because fluoride is already in your water. So we're adjusting the fluoride concentration. Add makes it sound like it's something that shouldn't be there, but it should be there. So we always want to use the word adjust. And you'll see I'll catch myself once in a while, but we adjust the fluoride level in water. We do not add fluoride to water. The other piece is that some people tend to say the word chemical when they're talking about fluoride, but it's a mineral. So we want to make sure that when we're talking with communities, we're talking about it as a mineral, as something that's naturally occurring that we simply want to adjust to an optimal level. And then the other comparison that tends to come up quite a bit is talking about, why should we add things or adjust things that aren't naturally there? And so we try to use the examples that, we've been doing this for decades in America, where we add folic acid and we add vitamin D and we add calcium and iodine. Think about your breakfast cereals. Think about your milk. We add all of these minerals and vitamins to make ourselves healthier. So water is no exception. We are simply adjusting the amount of fluoride to make our teeth healthier. And so those are really important communication points. People worry about, where does the fluoride come from? And, it's really coming from phosphate rock. You know what I mean? It's just that that's where the fluoride sort of leaks out of. And we get a lot of materials and a lot of different ingredients in very popular foods and drinks from things that come out of phosphate rock, like phosphoric acid that's in Coke and Pepsi. And then when we start talking about the cost, as I mentioned, the cost of treating dental disease can be very, very expensive, whereas the cost of simply adjusting the fluoride in a water system, for the most part, averages around $1 a person per year. There are some different techniques that can be used, and we actually have a new system that some of you may be aware of in your own states. It's a tablet system that's being used for small plants because there's so much kind of set up with the equipment for fluoridating water systems. A lot of times smaller systems that serve 10,000 people or less sort of price themselves out of being able to offer adjusted fluoride in the water. And there was a new technology that was just approved in the last year that's actually a tablet system. So it's meant for small systems, and it really doesn't cost very much at all. So, if you're only serving 10,000 people, it may only cost you $5,000 a year to fluoridate the water. So we have some new options coming up, and each state is going to be approving that tablet system at a different time. Pennsylvania hasn't approved it yet, so we're watching that very carefully. The other thing is, in addition to sort of the language that we use when we talk about water fluoridation, is we have to start thinking about partnerships. Because just, health advocates or just dental advocates pushing for water fluoridation doesn't always work. So what we've done in our coalition is we've done some different partnerships. We started talking to our water operators. So something that was said to me a few years back, and I found it to be really insightful, was that, water operators do more to help protect people's dental health than dentists do. They actually have more influence in the success of their dental health. So we want to make sure we're working with our water systems, and we want to make sure that we're aware of who's making those decisions. So for us in Pennsylvania, water fluoridation is governed locally. We've got 2,000 community water systems, and they each make up their own mind as to if they want to adjust fluoride or not. The Department of Environmental Protection in our state regulates the drinking water, but it's not necessarily, they're not the ones making the decision. So really, really important. We've gone and we've toured water systems, we've presented at their conferences, and we really want to start making those relationships with the water operators and the water systems. For our state, I mentioned we have those 2,000 water systems. We have about 200 systems that fluoridate, and every year, we have what's called a rollback or threatened rollback, where a water system says, maybe we don't want to fluoridate any longer. So we have had, this is just a map to show where we've either had water systems that have initiated or decided to stop fluoridating their water. And just to give you an idea, our northern tier is our most rural area in Pennsylvania. So, we have had, even in some of our rural systems, places where they've decided to roll back fluoridation. So what we've done is we've worked with some different groups. We were fortunate enough to be approached by the University of Pittsburgh and their water collaboratory, and they wanted to write a brief up to talk a little bit about fluoride and the importance of water fluoridation. And we were in the process of developing some GIS maps to show what parts of our state are fluoridated versus not fluoridated. And we were able to partner together with them to not only come out with the brief, but then also to complete this series of maps. And I'm going to go ahead and show you the next slide here. This is one of our GIS maps. So all of the areas that are blue are areas in the state that are fluoridated. All of the areas that are green are areas that are not fluoridated. So as you can see, we've got a ways to go in terms of getting our state. Right now, we're at about 55% of our systems are fluoridated in terms of the population they serve. And some of these big gaps up across that northern tier are places that are primarily served by wells. Okay. So we started these maps, we have them broken down. We have them broken down by county lines as demonstrated here. We also have layers that can be done interactively. This is all the state school districts. I mentioned earlier about 500 school districts in our state. As you can see, there are that many. And then what people are able to do is this map is available online so that health advocates can actually zoom into their specific address and find out if their water system is fluoridated or not. Now, with that, most states do participate in a system that the CDC operates called My Water's Fluoride. And when we talk about My Water's Fluoride, it's a place where you can put in your address and find out if your water system is fluoridated. I believe there are 8 states that officially don't participate with My Water's Fluoride. Pennsylvania is listed as participating, but it hasn't been updated in 11 years. So what we were able to do is to build our own GIS mapping system, and we actually reached out to all of the water systems in the state so that we could get as up-to-date kind of knowledge and data that we could to be able to populate this map. And it's an interactive map that we're able to constantly adjust and change as needed. So if somebody reports that their system isn't actually fluoridated, we can go in and change this on the back end really within a day or two. To be able to track the water systems. So this has been a project that we were really, really proud of because our state wasn't participating with My Water's Fluoride, and we wanted to make sure that people had access to finding out if their water was fluoridated or not. And we really had, just as an FYI, we had a student work on this. If you have somebody who's good with GIS maps, we were able to get the public shape files for the water systems, and we just went through and changed the ones we knew in a specific column and plugged it all into the system. You know, this whole project cost us like less than $5,000. And now we have this interactive map that can live on our website, and people can search it when they want to see if their system is fluoridated or not. So with that, these were the resources that I was going to promised, and I want to make sure we have some time for questions. So you can go to the link for My Water's Fluoride. Again, if your state participates, it's probably fairly accurate. And then also the CDC fluoridation page has a ton of resources available. You know, everything that you would ever want to know in terms of, you know, handouts and flyers and FAQs and all kinds of documentation. And then also would suggest that, as I mentioned, many states have oral health coalitions. So please feel free, if you're not working with your state oral health coalition, you can find them on this page, anoke.org, and reach out and talk to them. They'll want to talk to you, especially if you care about water fluoridation. And then lastly, my favorite site for all things water fluoridation, ilikemyteeth.org, has some really great resources, especially for community literacy level kind of approaches. So I'm going to stop there and allow some time, because I know we wanted to have a little bit of a discussion here talking about fluoride.
Thanks so much, Helen. Did you see Jill's question in the chat? I can read it to you too.
Yes, I mean, I'm going to actually stop sharing my slides so that I can see better. Let me do that. Okay, there we go. Yeah, so the question around, it's inexpensive to fluoridate, you know, and do we have grants to states that could be used in municipalities where cost may be a factor? I will say the CDC right now has 20 states that are awarded oral health funding. Pennsylvania is one of them. And one of the 3 focus areas for those grants is water fluoridation. So we've been able to do, let me think here, I believe we've awarded over $200,000 over the last 2 years for municipalities that either needed new equipment or were thinking of initiating fluoridation. So there is funding available. Where the cost comes in, that, you know, obviously on an annual basis, it's that dollar per person per year. But the initial setup requires that your facility has to be checked by an engineer, and there's permits. And for our state in particular, a major permit, which is what you need to start fluoridating, is like $50,000. So even though it might only cost the system $10,000 a year ongoing, it's that initial cost that tends to prohibit people from making the jump. So we try to help them with that. But again, you know, if for a municipality that serves 200,000 people, $50,000 shouldn't really be that much for the benefit that it provides. So I would say CDC, and then the other place that we look is the Department of Environmental Economic Development, Community and Economic Development. For us, it's the DCED. Those groups a lot of times will offer grants for water systems updates. Any other questions?
Let's see if anyone else wants to raise their hand or put a question in the chat box.
And if you just want to chat, you can come off of mute too.
Okay, so this is Lisa. I'm going to come off chat. Hello, Miss Helen. Thank you so much for spending so much time with us today. We're really lucky to have you. But, you know, in terms of the other state oral health coalitions, do you know if this is a project that they are working on, or would PCOH provide some technical assistance to other states that might want to do this and haven't yet?
Yeah, absolutely, especially pertaining to the mapping project. We actually presented, and I do apologize, I am not the fluoride guru at PCOH. We actually have a staff member who spends about half of her time just working on fluoride, and she is the one who is so smart about all of this. And so, you know, you're getting second best here. But what I will say is that the CDC, even though they're the ones who use My Water's Fluoride, they're actually very interested in our mapping project, and we are working with them to see ways that other states could adapt it and use it. It all depends on each individual state has different rules about the way that their shapefiles are shared, and if water systems, sometimes they consider that like a threat, like a terrorism threat, if you share your water system shapefiles. So I've heard from some states that they can't share that, they can't get that information. So it's harder to create those kinds of things from scratch, but there are definitely states that could do it relatively quickly if you know, like I said, if you have someone who can do GIS mapping and those shapefiles are available publicly, it's a very easy process to put it all together. And we actually had a student who did a ton of work on it for us, and we actually had her create a handbook for us and walk us through everything because we didn't know what she was doing. So we had her create a handbook so that we could replicate it if needed for other states or other programs. So very, very cool process, and definitely we're always willing to share. So, and I will say,
you're hardly second string, so, but thank you. You're way too humble.
I did see the question about the analysis available for different towns, linking the fluoridation status to overall health status. It's been done. What's been interesting is, you know, there have been, I believe, over 1,000 research studies, and a lot of them are looking specifically at that. We did have 3 different towns that I can think of that had elected to discontinue fluoridation, and they actually measured the health and the oral health of those communities like up to 10 years later, and actually saw a decline in the oral health status. So for years and years and years, they were in really great shape. They stopped fluoridating. All of a sudden, their oral health went down, and they actually voted to put the fluoride, readjust the fluoride back in the water system because they saw such a decline in the overall oral health status. So I would say that, you know, the CDC has the links on their website to a lot of those studies, and so does the I Like My Teeth page. So you can actually pull and see, because maybe somewhere in your state has already done a study, which is always better for, in terms of advocacy, you want to try to grab the local information if you have it.
Any other questions or comments for Helen? Thanks for the shout out, Jill. I appreciate it.
Yeah, this has been super informative for me. I knew some of the stuff, but we've been working in these communities trying to, with our oral health department, on some of these communities that are so hesitant, and they don't even want to hear it sometimes. It's frustrating.
Yeah. What state are you from, Jill?
Sorry, we're getting like really bad thunderstorms, so my computer is going a little in and out. I'm from the state of Rhode Island, so we don't have like the ruralness that you have, but that's where they were finding the hesitancy the most. I even brought it up with somebody that I know who works for the water department. He goes, "Don't ever ask me that again." Like, he was so mad at me, and like, we're friends, and he was getting madder and madder. And I was like, no, like, but I think the way you phrased it at the end, I think I'm going to use that. I'm going to talk to somebody about that, because I think if we phrase it like that, that might work. I don't know. Like, they're the same group that won't get vaccinated too. So.
Yeah. Well, and that's something I didn't mention, but we find that our anti-fluorides and our anti-vaxxers are very much the same population. So.
And they're also the group that has the highest smoking and drinking rate. So it makes no sense to me. They don't want to put certain things in their body, but they'll put all this other stuff in.
Absolutely. And I will say, just as a Rhode Island shout out, I never can say his name right, but Dr. Zwetchkenbaum, who's the dental director for Rhode Island, is amazing. And I think he even did some commercials last year or the year before that were for water fluoridation and not drinking sugary beverages or something. So you guys have a really great leader there.
We call him Dr. Z. Yeah, he's actually a good friend of mine, and him and I, outside of work, both belong to the Carolina Club. We go out and watch games and stuff like that together. So.
That's awesome.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Well, Helen, thank you so much for pulling double duty. Oh, sorry.
Thank you for doing
Go ahead, Lisa.
Pennsylvania proud. Yay! You and Kelly, you're rock stars.
We've got good teams, that's for sure. So
All right. Thank you so much, Helen. I do really appreciate it.